The afternoon sun bathed Washington, D.C. in a golden hue as reporters buzzed around Capitol Hill like bees to honey. But inside the towering marble halls of the Senate, the atmosphere was anything but serene. The hearing room was packed, cameras lined the back walls, and all eyes were fixed on one man, Kash Patel, the newly appointed director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation under President Donald Trump. Kash adjusted his tie as he prepared to testify. His mission today was simple, or so it seemed. He was called to brief the Senate Judiciary Committee on a sweeping anti-corruption probe that had been launched months earlier under Trump's direct orders. But what no one knew was that Kash Patel wasn't here just to brief. He was here to expose. Across the polished mahogany table, Senator Lindsey Graham leaned back in his chair, confident as ever. The senator from South Carolina, a seasoned political operator, had weathered dozens of hearings. He had been vocal about draining the swamp, but always seemed to emerge unscathed when corruption probes turned toward D.C. insiders. Director Patel, Graham began, his southern drawl filling the chamber. "We appreciate your time. Let's not waste it. Can you give us an update on the so-called corruption crackdown? The American people deserve transparency." Kash looked directly at Graham. His eyes were steady, almost piercing. Slowly, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. The room fell into a hushed silence. Even the hum of reporters' cameras seemed to pause. "Senator Graham, the American people do deserve transparency. That's why I'm here today, not to give a vague update, but to lay bare the facts." Kash's voice was calm but powerful. He placed the folder on the table, his fingers resting on it like it contained a loaded weapon. "These files contain evidence gathered over the past 8 months. Evidence of corruption that reaches the highest levels of government, including members of this very committee." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Graham's face lost its usual color. He shifted in his seat, his trademark grin faltering. "Director Patel, what are you implying?" he asked, his voice tightening. Kash opened the folder. Inside were documents stamped top secret and declassified by order of the president. Photos, wire transcripts, and banking records peeked from between the pages. Kash held up a photo, a grainy surveillance shot of Graham exiting a private jet on a remote island runway. This investigation uncovered secret offshore accounts, foreign kickbacks, and unauthorized meetings that violate federal ethics laws, Kash declared. "And Senator Graham, your name appears over a dozen times." The room exploded into chaos. Reporters shouted questions, senators whispered urgently to aides, and Graham struggled to keep his composure. "This is preposterous," he barked. "A smear campaign by the Trump administration. You're trying to discredit me for standing up to your overreach." But Kash didn't flinch. He slid another document forward, a wire transfer record showing millions moved from a shadowy defense contractor into a Graham-affiliated super PAC. "These aren't accusations, Senator. These are facts. The president authorized full declassification so the American people can see for themselves." The hearing chair banged the gavel, demanding order. But the chamber was a tinderbox. A senator next to Graham pushed back his chair and stood, his face pale as he glanced at the files. "My God, is this real?" Kash nodded solemnly. "Every word, every number, every photo. I came here today because the Bureau's job is to protect this nation from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And corruption at this level? That's the greatest enemy of all." Lindsey Graham stared at the files, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He realized at that moment that this wasn't just another hearing. This was the beginning of his reckoning. The clamor inside the hearing room showed no signs of subsiding. Lindsey Graham clutched the edge of the table, his knuckles white, as the storm he never saw coming crashed down around him. The cameras zoomed in on his face, capturing every twitch, every bead of sweat glistening under the hot glare of the lights. This footage would play on every news network within minutes. "Order! Order in this chamber!" roared the chairman, his gavel striking down like thunder. But his calls were lost in the flood of murmurs and gasps. Even senators from Graham's own party exchanged uneasy glances, distancing themselves from the man who just moments ago seemed untouchable. Kash Patel remained composed as if he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. In truth, he had. He had spent sleepless nights poring over the evidence, consulting with President Trump, and preparing for this exact confrontation. The weight of duty pressed heavily on his shoulders, but he welcomed it. "Senator Graham, let me be clear," Kash continued, his voice cutting through the noise like a razor. "This is not political theater. The Bureau has followed the money, tracked communications, and verified witnesses. We are not dealing in speculation, we are presenting proof. He slid another file across the table. This one contained transcripts of encrypted messages decoded by FBI cyber units. Messages that tied Graham to backroom deals with foreign energy companies seeking to bypass U.S. sanctions for profit. Kash tapped the document with his finger. These exchanges show coordination with agents of foreign governments to undermine U.S. policy for personal gain. Graham's mouth opened, but no words came out. His mind raced. He thought about the deals he had justified to himself as just politics, the favors repaid, the lines crossed in the name of expedience. Never had he imagined it would all be laid bare like this. Finally, he found his voice, though it trembled. This is a witch hunt. Graham thundered. You and Trump, this is your revenge for my criticism. I won't sit here and be slandered. But the other senators weren't so quick to rally behind him. Senator Josh Hawley leaned forward, his face tight with concern. Director Patel, these are serious allegations. What's the next step? Kash didn't hesitate. The Bureau is referring this evidence to a special grand jury convened at the direction of the Attorney General. Arrest warrants and subpoenas are ready to be issued. And we have the full support of President Trump in pursuing justice, wherever it leads. Outside, reporters sprinted to their news vans, the headline writing itself, FBI Director exposes corruption in Senate. Graham at center of scandal. Social media exploded. Hashtags like hashtag Grahamgate, hashtag Patel Files, and hashtag Drain the Swamp for Real trending within seconds. Inside the chamber, Graham's world was crumbling. He turned to his legal counsel seated behind him, whispering furiously. But Kash wasn't finished. He stood, gathering the documents, and addressed the entire room. I don't take joy in this. I took an oath to protect this country and its constitution. Corruption at the highest levels has eroded the people's trust. Today is the first step in restoring that trust. No one is above the law, not even a United States senator. Graham's facade of bravado shattered. For the first time in decades, the master politician had no script, no spin, no escape. Cameras captured the moment his hands dropped from the table and into his lap as if the weight of his own deeds had finally become too much to bear. The scene outside Capitol Hill was nothing short of a media frenzy. Helicopters hovered overhead, their blades chopping the humid D.C. air. Reporters lined the marble steps, their microphones jostling for position as they shouted over one another. The story had gripped the nation within minutes of Kash Patel's revelation. Major networks interrupted regular programming with banners flashing, Senator Graham named in FBI corruption files. Meanwhile, inside the hearing room, tension hung thick. Lindsey Graham remained seated, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow as he stared at the damning documents spread before him. The files seemed to glow under the overhead lights, a reminder of the secrets he'd kept buried for years, now unearthed for the world to see. Senator Ted Cruz broke the silence. Director Patel, surely there must be some misunderstanding. Are you telling us you have enough to indict a sitting U.S. senator? Kash met his gaze without blinking. Senator Cruz, this bureau has built a case on facts, not innuendo. Wire transfers, recorded conversations, whistleblower testimony, we have it all. I didn't come here to speculate. I came here to uphold the law. At that moment, Kash reached into his folder once more, pulling out a sealed affidavit. He handed it to the committee chair. That's the sworn testimony of a former Graham staffer. He details how Graham personally ordered the destruction of records tied to illicit overseas dealings. A collective murmur rippled through the chamber. Graham's head snapped up. That's a lie. His voice cracked under the strain. A disgruntled staffer trying to make a name for himself. Kash raised a hand, stopping the outburst cold. The staffer passed a polygraph. His account corroborates independent evidence gathered by the Bureau. From the back of the room came the unmistakable shuffle of Secret Service agents entering quietly. They moved with purpose, standing at the perimeter of the hearing room. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The executive branch wasn't just watching, Trump's administration was ready to act. Outside, protesters began gathering. Some chanted, "Lock him up." Others held signs reading, "Justice at last," and "Drain the swamp means everyone." The city, always on edge in these turbulent times, seemed to pulse with a new energy. Kash took a deep breath before delivering the next blow. It's not just about Graham. This investigation is ongoing. But he is the highest-ranking official so far who is implicated. And as director of the FBI, I will not stop until every stone is turned over and every corrupt actor held accountable. Senator Marsha Blackburn leaned forward, her voice low and wary. Director Patel, if what you say is true, this could destabilize the entire Senate. Have you considered the consequences? Kash's answer came swiftly. Senator, I've considered the consequences of not acting. Corruption unchecked is a greater threat to our democracy than any political fallout. Night fell over Washington, but the city did not sleep. News stations ran wall-to-wall coverage. The once unthinkable had happened. A sitting U.S. senator, one of the most influential voices in Congress, now stood accused of deep corruption, with evidence made public in a stunning act of transparency by the FBI under Director Kash Patel. Outside Graham's townhouse in a quiet D.C. neighborhood, the street was packed with reporters, cameras flashing as his black SUV pulled up. Graham stepped out, his face drawn and weary. The confident swagger was gone. In its place was a man cornered, his political future slipping through his fingers like sand. He pushed through the throng without a word, ignoring the shouted questions. Senator Graham, will you fight the charges? Do you plan to resign? Did you sell out America for money? Inside, his staff huddled around televisions, watching as pundits dissected every detail. Some loyal aides whispered about damage control. Others were already updating their resumes, sensing the inevitable fall. Meanwhile, at the White House, President Donald Trump sat behind the resolute desk, watching the chaos unfold on multiple screens. His expression was unreadable, but his inner circle knew this was the moment he had waited for. For years, Trump had promised to expose the swamp. Now, with Kash Patel leading the charge, that promise was being fulfilled. Kash is doing what the people elected me to do, Trump said to his aides. We're restoring law and order. No exceptions. Back at FBI headquarters, Kash Patel worked deep into the night. His office was a fortress of files, maps, and encrypted messages decoded by Bureau cyber units. He knew Graham was just the tip of the iceberg. The paper trail linked other figures, staffers, lobbyists, even foreign diplomats. But Graham had been the keystone, the first domino to fall. His phone buzzed. It was the Attorney General. The grand jury is ready. We're moving on Graham in the morning. Trump signed off. You've got full authority. Kash allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. But only a moment. He knew what came next would be harder. The fallout could rock the nation, but the mission was clear. No one was above the law. The next morning, as the sun rose over the Capitol dome, the storm broke in full force. Federal agents executed warrants across D.C., seizing electronic devices, freezing suspicious accounts, and questioning key witnesses. The media scrambled to keep up as headlines blared. FBI raid Graham Associates, corruption net widens. In the Senate, colleagues who had once praised Graham now distanced themselves. Statements poured in, filled with carefully chosen words of concern, shock, and calls for accountability. The American public watched, riveted. Polls showed overwhelming support for Kash Patel's bold action. Social media swarmed with praise and threats. Patel had made powerful enemies. But he had also inspired a weary nation that had long doubted justice could ever touch the elite. By midday, Graham appeared on live television. His face pale, his voice strained, he made a statement from a podium outside his home. These allegations are false. I will fight them with every legal means at my disposal. I have served this nation faithfully, and I will not resign under this cloud of lies. But even as he spoke, the evidence spoke louder. The files Patel had unveiled were now public record, and the court of public opinion had already begun its judgment. Inside the FBI, Kash stood at the window of his office looking out at the city below. He knew the real battle was just beginning. The days that followed felt like an earthquake rolling through Washington. Every news cycle brought fresh revelations as the files Kash Patel had exposed were dissected, analyzed, and debated across the nation. Talk radio, cable news, and social media alike seethed with fury, shock, and, in many quarters, relief. For too long, the people had watched scandals rise and fall only to see the powerful walk away untouched. But this felt different. At the FBI, Kash Patel worked round the clock with his team. Subpoenas flew out to banks, corporations, and foreign entities. Confidential witnesses came forward, emboldened by the sudden crack in the dam of silence that had protected the D.C. elite. What began as an investigation into one man was now a sweeping anti-corruption campaign unlike anything in modern American history. In the Senate, Lindsey Graham's once firm alliances crumbled. Colleagues who had shared stages and campaign trails with him now spoke of the need for integrity and restoring public trust. Privately, many of them wondered if they too would be next. Graham's staff began resigning in droves, unwilling to go down with a sinking ship. Inside his darkened office, Graham stared out at the Capitol, haunted by what he'd built and what he'd lost. The walls that had once echoed with power broker deals now felt like a prison. Legal counsel advised him to cooperate, to cut a deal before it was too late. But Graham's pride was a stubborn thing. "They won't take me down," he muttered. "Not like this." But the noose tightened. The grand jury moved swiftly, indicting Graham on charges of conspiracy, bribery, and fraud. The Justice Department announced the charges in a somber press conference, flanked by Kash Patel and the Attorney General. The evidence was overwhelming. Offshore accounts, laundered funds, secret meetings with foreign agents, and a paper trail a mile long. Kash stood at the podium, looking into the cameras. "This is not about politics. This is about the rule of law. The FBI will pursue corruption wherever it hides. Let this be a message to anyone who thinks they are untouchable. The American people deserve better, and they will have it." The arrest came at dawn. Federal agents arrived at Graham's residence, giving him one last chance to surrender with dignity. Cameras captured the moment he emerged, hands raised, his expression a mixture of defiance and defeat. Across America, reactions were electric. In small towns and big cities, people gathered in bars, living rooms, and town squares, watching history unfold. Many wept, not from sorrow but from a sense of vindication, that at long last the powerful were being held accountable. In the weeks that followed, Kash Patel's investigation expanded. More names surfaced. Lobbyists, officials, and corporate titans who had treated the government as their personal piggy bank. But for all the noise and fury, Kash stayed focused on the mission. This wasn't about headlines. In the weeks that followed, Kash Patel's investigation expanded. More names surfaced, lobbyists, officials, and corporate titans who had treated the government as their personal piggy bank. But for all the noise and fury, Kash stayed focused on the mission. This wasn't about headlines. It was about restoring faith in the system. President Trump addressed the nation in a primetime speech, praising Kash's courage and the Bureau's work. "We promised to drain the swamp," Trump declared. "Tonight, we have shown America that promise was real." Graham's trial gripped the nation, a spectacle of testimony, documents, and damning evidence. In the end, the jury delivered its verdict, guilty on all counts. The once mighty senator was sentenced to decades behind bars, his legacy forever tarnished. And Kash Patel? He became a symbol, a man who had stared down corruption and didn't blink. Under his leadership, the Bureau had done what many thought impossible. It had reminded America that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law. As he stood on the steps of the FBI building, the city bathed in twilight behind him, Kash allowed himself one deep breath. The fight wasn't over. But tonight, justice had won.